right. Thank you, Savita, and the India Research Management Initiative of India Alliance for inviting me to participate in the second annual conference. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nukala. I'm Senior Community Engagement Officer, and I'm glad to be joining so many friends from Germany. So before we get to the discussion, I have a few housekeeping notes. So let me just pull up my notes, 1 second. Okay, so I'm your moderator for a conversation on enabling research with an outstanding panel with us today. The panel discussion will run for about 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A. We have 2 questions for each of the panelists and 5 minutes for each question. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available in the public domain. So if you have objections, you may leave at this time. The audio and video of the participants will be switched off until the Q&A session. However, you will have an opportunity to share your questions and suggestions in the chat function throughout the session. And please indicate if it is for a specific speaker or all of them, and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end. So without further delay, allow me to extend a warm welcome to our panelists, Dr. Shailja Gupta, Dr. Nandini Kumar, Ms. Stephanie Fogel, and a recording from Dr. Dorairaj Prabhakaran. So let me start with Dr. Shailja Gupta. She is the Chief Project Director of IND-CEPI at THSTI Faridabad. Dr. Gupta previously served as former Senior Advisor, Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, and former Advisor, Department of Biotechnology, Ministry of Science and Technology. She was responsible for overseeing several international collaborations, both with governments and non-governmental organizations, India Alliance being one of them. So, Dr. Gupta, welcome. So in June 2022, PSA Professor Ajay Kumar Sood said that the National Research Foundation, or NRF, is put on fast track. It will have a comprehensive way of dealing with funding, even large-scale funding, because extra funds are coming in. So this is great news for researchers and research. You yourself have been involved in NRF formation, and in the proposal it says growing outstanding research cells already existing at state universities will also be a top priority of the NRF. So what might one expect for research management based on your insights?
Thank you, Win, and thank you, India Alliance, for having me here in this discussion. I'm really happy to be here. Regarding the NRF and the research ecosystem in India, NRF actually was established with a vision to bring the educational system in India and the research system in India a little bit more closer. If you look at our system, almost the 90% of our funding, research funding goes to 90% of research funding goes to our research institutions, which are not engaged in education. Well, only 10% of our research funding goes to universities, which are mostly engaged in education and do not carry out much research. This dichotomy of research and education is very unique to India, and while we have created huge capacity in research by supporting about 500 odd research institutions, top-class research institutions across India, we have not invested so much in bringing the educational system, the undergrad, postgrad, and education system closer to the research ecosystem. And one of the aims of the NRF was to bring this two ecosystems together. The other aspect which the Prime Minister stated was that 90% of the Indian students or researchers are going to university system. Only 10% of them are going to the research academies. While our funding is right opposite, 90% of our funding is going to research institutions with 10% of students. while 10% of research funding is going to the, universities, which have 90% of the students. So this is a huge gap, and which NRF hopes and proposes to bridge it. And how do you do that? It's a very, it is very simple. You just create these research clusters of institutions and let them be accessible to the university systems around the place. There's so much which can be easily done with the investment which is already available. Like, no new organization or no new systems need to be put into place, but we can use the existing system to expand what is already happening. And research, as you will know, is so integral to anything related to higher education. And just not science, it is research in humanities, social sciences, history, art, culture. And that is completely missing in our Indian ecosystem. So research as something which we need to invest in more in, not just in science, but across systems, whether it is economics, whether it is art, culture, science, social sciences, is imperative, and it is important for a developing country which by next year will have the largest population in the world to invest in. And that is the concept of NRF. And that is something which was unique. All the other thing which NRF envisaged was complete dissociation from the government. The board would have no representative of the government, whether it is secretaries of various S&T organizations or financial advisors of various ministries. It is envisaged that it is independent of the government, but is run by scientists from the industry, non-governmental organization and academia, such that it is a flexible and a nimble organization. I'll stop here, but I'll let you two go on, because there's a lot which can be stated, but I will stop now.
Sure. As a quick follow-up to that, so if there is this massive funding coming in to universities and research institutes, but perhaps the focus is more on the universities, so there needs to be sort of absorptive capacity at the universities in terms of identifying relevant opportunities and making sure researchers are applying and availing those funds. So what do you see as the role for that research management unit within this sort of emerging setup?
So let me clarify, it is not huge amount of funds which are coming. It's a relatively modest amount of funds which are budgeted for NRF, which is fine. I think if you look at the India Alliance example, we started with a lot of budget, but we were not able to tap that large amount of budget till we sort of peaked in the 4th or 5th year, which I think is a good way of starting. If we start with micro grants to universities and evaluate how they use the micro grants, I mean micro grants are small amounts of grants, not large grants, and then go and see how they ramp up the use of their funds in a creative and creative manner and in a more impactful manner. You can actually ramp up the funding very quickly. Giving large amount of funds, I have, in my personal opinion, and in my experience of 25-30 years of funding, is not the way to unleash creative energies, so to speak. It makes people complacent more often than not. So giving them smaller amount of grants, looking at the impact of those grants and seeing how they go forward is something I think which we should consider more than thing. NRF is very well poised to do that if it comes across. There's a big if there, and if it comes across, NRF should be looking at different and disruptive ways of funding rather than the standard business as usual way of funding. If NRF fails to do that, then it fails in the concept, with the concept it has been thought of.
Okay, thank you. And on that subject, you actually wrote an article in July of this year. And there's one statement that really stuck with me, which is ease of governance and ease of doing science are essential to match rapid scientific evolution. So from your vast experience in the government sector, how might funding bodies better connect with universities and institutes and support each other on research management?
I think ease of doing science is fundamental. When we signed the MOU with EMBO, and Professor Maria Leptin was in India, and she had a lecture, and it has stuck with me forever. She said that EMBO funds people, they look at the best, they fund them, forget about them, and then at the end of the research duration or the project duration, they are evaluated with great rigor. And that has stayed with me. I think that is the kind of flexibility we should have. Fund, forget it with rigor. That is missing in India. I think either we do not evaluate or we over-evaluate. We have no sense of how science and its outcomes should be audited. And the government looks at it like any other ministry where audits are supposed to be in the same manner as building a bridge or laying a highway. That there are timelines, and they don't do a very good audit of that as well. Timelines are not done very well there as well. And this is in public forum, but it's okay. But imagine science being audited on those same parameters. And I think that needs to change very rapidly. NRF should be looking at science audits, return on investments, the kind of budget the Department of Biotechnology has only 3% of the total S&T budget. And the total S&T budget combined of all ministries, departments, including Department of Space, DRDO, everything, we have about 1.2, 1.3, a maximum 1.5 billion US dollars, which is pittance in terms of, if you look at NIH budget, it is 45 billion US dollars. And of that, DBT gets only 3%. And the return on investment, which DBT has done on that 3% is huge, whether it's in capacity building, whether it is human training, whether it is in terms of bringing out products which have impacted in Indian economic growth. I think it has been huge. So our audits need to be reframed and reorganized. Otherwise, and we hope that NRF will be able to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. If Dr. Nandini Kumar is able to hear us, I would like to bring her in.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. By way of introduction, Dr. Nandini Kumar is the Vice President at Forum for Ethics Review Committees in India, member of Niti Aayog Committee for Interdisciplinary Health Policy, and member of Steering Committee of Forum for Ethical Review Committees in the Asian and Western Pacific region. She is the former Deputy Director General at the Indian Council of Medical Research, and she's an expert in bioethics education, training, and practice, including human subjects research. Welcome, Dr. Kumar. I guess my first question is, from your policy and ethics perspective, what are the expectations of funding agencies such as ICMR on statutory compliances, and How can researchers and research managers at institutions ensure they are aware of and meet these expectations?
In fact, at the outset, I must thank the organizers for inviting me to be one of the panelists. It's an honor. And coming back to with your questions, um, the major, of course, we are just talking about the health research part, biomedical and health research part. We will leave out agriculture because that's the highest funding in the country that ICAR receives. The others actually fall behind that. So the major funding agencies, of course, are DST, DVT, ICMR, and now Ayush. It gets a big chunk of funds for that. How it is utilized, of course, people are learning. Uh, when it comes to utilization of this grant, of course, Shailja explained how it should be utilized, how it should be audited to see whether it was worthwhile giving all that fund, etc., etc. But when it comes to research, there's also another very important aspect of adherence to ethical guidelines and regulations existent in the country, as well as when it comes to foreign funding, whether it is compliant with the foreign regulations and guidelines as it is. So the ICMR, of course, stands foremost in that. The ethical guidelines, which had been released in 2017 were the national ethical guidelines, which are actually considered equivalent to the US regulations, considered as equivalent protective to research participants. And now these ethical guidelines we had been pushing for quite some time to convert it into a law. But cutting the story short, after a lot of dialogues about it, discussions about it, circulation of the document to so many ministries, finally it got accepted indirectly in the new drugs and clinical trial rules. The 15th clause actually describes that if you are going to do, if an ethics committee, it was actually addressing the ethics committee, but indirectly it has mandated that any biomedical and health research in the country which has to be reviewed by the ethics committee should comply with the ICMR guidelines of 2017. Of course, the next one, if it comes through, they'll have to follow that. Whereas DBT has been concentrating a lot on genetically modified research and products, etc., innovations, and many areas actually. And so these guidelines again come into the picture. With regard to that, there are actually separate regulations for treating such products. And then DST, it has its leg in almost many areas of research pertaining to, of course, health. And Ayush, of course, Ayush also has now learned that the ethical guidelines that have been made actually should be followed by them too. It's not like they'll have a separate guideline or something like that. So what were the guidelines which were enunciated centuries ago hold true, but it has to take into account the modern developments that have happened, and that is provided by the ICMR guidelines. And then, of course, we have the other requirements for clinical trials, especially like good clinical practice, good clinical research practice, if you want to expand that. So for that also, I must say that all these disciplines are actually falling in line to undergo that training, etc. So how to address this? It's the duty of every institution to see to it that their researchers get adequate training in all these areas. There have been attempts, but I feel that you need to have inter-agency mechanism to see that, to feel that this is our guideline, that ownership business. should be adopted by all the agencies, and they should see to it, because it's not DHR's responsibility alone to send a circular, all the researchers should get trained and all that. In fact, many institutions didn't even know and didn't care also for that. But when it became a law, when NDCT about, then slowly, one by one, people started asking for these training programs. And I have a good experience of that, how people have been calling me overnight and saying, ma'am, can you please give a talk on such and such topic and all that. So I feel that it's time for us to actually fade and youngsters to come up. But I see very few youngsters actually who are so enthusiastic and all that. But it's building. I must say it's building. So it has to be actually a joint effort, including CDSCO, the regulators, and EC, Ethics Committee, has to be actually addressed in this task. I must say that WHO TDR actually started this initiative because they had these trial sites across the globe, and the person who was responsible for all these types of research felt that if you have to be ethical about it, how to conduct the research in an ethical manner, you need to teach the ethics committees first. So that's how she first started the initiative in the Asia Pacific region, or the Forum for Ethics Review Committees in Asia Pacific region. It started from there, and then it started spreading all over. And of course, Forum for Ethics Review Committees in India, of which I am a part, is the national chapter for that. But they expanded to other global regions like Latin America, Eastern Europe, US, Canada, Pan-African, Latin America countries, along with public sector partners like OHRP, ICMR, NIH, and also private sector people like Verb. Verb is Western IRB, and you have the big pharma group called Pharma, and other private sector partners coming together as a virtual organization called the Strategic Initiative for the Development of Capacity of Ethical Review. So that started actually across the globe. They started mostly, actually, I must say, mostly it got confined to the Asia Pacific region because that was a very active forum. And they started first going to different countries, telling them about the guidelines, the international guidelines, of course, because they did not have their own national guidelines. They started talking about it and primed them to that. And it has come up in a big way now. And now we have the surveys, so of which India is also a part, and we have 17 organizations in India which are recognized. But I must say, this is not enough. Of course, the quality control of India came into the picture when the regulatory trials, had so many regulations coming in. So they stepped in. They actually had this NABH for Ethics Committee, doing the accreditation process for the Ethics Committee. So we have 100 and odd institutions in India which have been actually accredited by them. And besides that, we also have the American group, the Alliance for Accreditation for Human Research Protection Program, but that can be afforded only by the corporate sector. So we also have that in our country. The only institution which has all the 3 certificates is actually the Tata Memorial Hospital. But I will say that even today, or maybe 10 years from now, we never can send, because one of the member secretaries asked me when I was trying to advise them, address me, we don't want to have 10 out of 10. I was so angry, but I controlled myself, and at the end I said that none of the ethics committees in the world will get 10 out of 10 because it's a human nature. Always there'll be some gap, but shouldn't we strive to get it?
Yeah,
that's my question.
So
So that
if I
is the
may,
way I think probably all of us can come together and work.
thank you. Thank you for that comprehensive overview. So just a quick follow-up. So you mentioned within the Indian context, there are 4 or 5 departments, ministries, and they may have slightly different requirements. So is there a one-stop shop where, as a research manager, one could go and figure out what are all the requirements from these different departments as of now, or perhaps is that needed?
Yeah, actually, we don't have a one-stop phenomenon right now. We may have 2 or 3 phenomena going along. With regard to ethics, I would say that there have been short courses and long courses in the country. Not many, but still, the movement has started. I myself, when I had the NIH grant for 10 years, had started the movement, and it has been actually picked up by many institutions, and now we have other agencies also. Short courses, ICMR did a number of them, and presently, actually, it has been made mandatory for all researchers to undergo the basic course in biomedical research by the National Medical Commission. That all researchers have to actually undergo that course run by the ICMR institution, which also runs one ethics committee review course for health research. Then we have Manipal having 2 month courses. Then we have another private agency called Drishti, which also runs a course. I think it is 10 weeks, but there are intervals in between. And then we also have long courses like diploma courses. These diploma courses are not many. The PSG institution in Coimbatore used to run that. It's having some difficulty now, administrative. Yenepoya University in Bangalore used to run that. Now that university is actually running a master's program. And recently I came to know that the Cochin University, in the name of Professor Madhav Menon, who was very much interested. He was the founder director of National Law School in Bangalore. In his name, and he was very much interested in ethics, and he was very much a part of ICMR activities in that area. So it has been started in his name, a master's program. Then for medical law and ethics, we have Aston Institute of International Studies in Haryana. We have National Law School also having some little part of it. And then we have the clinical research, especially with regard to clinical trials, a master's course run by the DBT organization, institution, Translational Health for Science and Technology Institute. And then there are, of course, with 6 partners across the country. And then we have private sector people running the show. We have actually, Shailja had mentioned about social science. So we have one for social science and public health ethics run by the Friends of Medical Ethics Society, FMES, which actually has this called HEAL, Health, Ethics and Law. They run a course. GCP, again, good clinical practice has been, that course has been running from half a day to 1 day or 2 days, or in a much more serious manner by, again, the Translation Health Science and Technology Institute, called the GCP PCS, that is Personal Certification. And it has already started, started in the sense applications have been invited, it was launched earlier. And then, of course, we have private sectors, etc., coming in.
Thank you, Dr. Nandini. Dr. Nandini, I think we'll have to, I'm sorry, we have to move on.
Yeah,
but
I just wanted to make one more point, that the micro grant that was actually highlighted is a very, very good idea, and it's a incentive for students. There are many students who are very eager to do research, so they have to be tapped in the form of student fellowship, which of course ICMR, etc., has been doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive overview and list of potential opportunities for training. Moving on, so now I would like to invite an international colleague, Ms. Stephanie Fogel, who's currently based in the grant office at the Institute of Science and Technology, Austria. She is responsible for the financial management and controlling of research funding. She has over 10 years of experience working in research management at research-intensive institutions. So, Ms. Fogel, welcome. I guess my first question is, you are a research manager. How do you raise awareness and secure critical buy-in and long-term support, both from the institute leadership as well as researchers themselves?
Good morning from Austria. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to join this panel. It is an honor to be able to share my experience with you. I think this question is a really important one and one I'm very happy to talk about. I would say to start with the aspect of the leadership, because without their buy-in, there really is only so much we can do from a grant office perspective. Primarily, I think demonstrating the added value is extremely important in securing leadership support, regardless of the size of the organization or the hierarchical style. In my experience, this has been an extremely effective way to showcase what we actually do and to get this buy-in and to get the support from the leadership. So the questions that I would ask are, what is our added value as research managers, or what is the added value of our grant office? Secondly, our job as research managers is so varied. Even the titles from colleagues of mine, my title is grant officer. I've also been a project manager. I've been a project officer. I've been a research manager. I have colleagues with all of these different titles as well, and all of the job day-to-day tasks are very varied. We are all in the same sphere, but the tasks that we do on a day-to-day basis are very different. And so I think we should not be afraid to go back to basics with leadership. And what I mean with this is that we should not be afraid to really reintroduce ourselves as research managers or as the research management office or grant office, to really go back to basics and say, this is what we do on the ground on a day-to-day basis. These are our tasks. This is what we do. This is how we support researchers. This is how we prepare applications. This is how we do the budgets. I think they simply, in often leadership are not aware of the tasks that we do. And to just bring their attention to this can really bridge this gap. And the communication can help instill some confidence and some long-term support, definitely from that. And what we can think about presenting in these cases or communicating with the leadership, for example, are a lot of different, what I've found in my experiences has been very poignant, are things such as, how many researchers do we support on a month or during 1 year? How many applications do we support during 1 year? What is the monetary value of this? How many applications were awarded? What is the monetary value of this? Generally, we as research managers are here to facilitate access to funding, and this should be a priority for any research institution. And if we explain and go back to this basic level of what our kind of basic job is to facilitate this access to funding, I think this can really bridge this gap. And this actually leads nicely to my next point that I would make. And this is about data collection, because I just mentioned here to kind of bring these statistics on how many applications did we submit, how many researchers did we support. So I think having a system in place for the grant office or for yourself as a research manager to keep track of the work that you're doing as a grant office is really important, to show some evidence to the leadership look, this is what we have done so far. This is what we have helped support. This really can secure long-term support and also trust from the leadership that you are doing a good job, basically. And one thing, one last point I would make on the leadership side is to not be afraid to share best practice and benchmark yourself against other grant officers. And I've had some really, really good experiences with colleagues from a lot of different networks, colleagues who I've met at conferences, who I've worked with on presentations for conferences like this, who I've been part of in working groups. And it's been a very open discussion on what we offer in terms of services, what we offer to researchers and what they offer. Okay, so what does your research support office offer? Okay, interesting. I could take that back to my office and suggest this. So it's about sharing this best practice and also importantly sharing not just the best practice, but also what doesn't work. This was really nice when colleagues felt comfortable enough to share things that didn't work. Well, I think it really helps to hone in your skills and hone in your priorities as a grant office, as a research manager, what you want to focus on. And in terms of the benchmarking, it sounds a little corporate or a little competitive, and it's not meant to sound like that. But I just found in my experience, I just really enjoyed this aspect of doing research and finding out what grant officers offer to researchers, what level of services do they offer, and is that something that we could expand? I was always looking to expand. Where could I go next? What else could we offer? What do our researchers need? And looking at what other bigger universities, universities that are more successful with international funding or more successful with a particular type of grant, if I look into them and benchmark myself against what services they offer, this can really give me some kind of leverage with leadership to say, okay, and this actually did work in a previous institution I worked at, where we took evidence from certain universities and said, this is what they're doing and this is what we want to do as well, because we think that it adds value for our researchers, and they actually accepted this proposal. So I think that this gives a lot of leverage with the leadership. If you really go out there and do your research and present it in a kind of in a package to the leadership.
Great. And sorry, go ahead.
Yes, sorry, I just realized I should talk about about the researchers as well, because I think this is an important part, especially because we are part of the administration, and sometimes with amongst the research community that it may be seen as a hindrance that we are part of the administration, getting them to tick boxes, fill out forms, etc. And I think it's very important to build trust with the researchers. So again, this idea of demonstrating added value is important for the researchers, communicating your services so the researchers know exactly where to go and what you can offer. And most importantly, be the expert and show, yes, they are the expert in the scientific aspect. They can write the science side. You can do everything else. You can do the application, finalize the application. You can help with the budgeting. You can help manage the project once it's awarded, as long as they focus on the science. And actually, once you've got this idea that it really helps them free up time to just focus on the science, it actually kind of works very nicely. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. And actually on that last point about being the expert, from your experience, what are the key skills needed in a research manager? And perhaps if you could share some of the professional development opportunities one might avail internationally.
Yes, actually from my experience, soft skills have been the most important. So soft skills being things like communication, problem solving, project management, coordination, organization. These have been the foundation to my research management career in the past 10 years. Mostly because these skills can be very easily transferred into different roles within research management. I've moved from grant acquisition from a corporate point of view to grant application and grant scheme management to from a non-profit point of view. And then I moved into the academic sphere at a university level, where I was supporting researchers, training researchers. And now I work at a research institute managing the grants that are awarded. And all of these skills that I have been easily transferred between. And it's funny because I've had so many conversations with colleagues, and again in these kind of informal working groups or amongst colleagues at conferences, about the pros and cons of hiring, or not pros and cons necessarily, let's not say it like that, but whether the strategy should be to hire research managers with the scientific background or whether it's not necessary. And it completely depends on the strategy or the focus of the grant office. I've worked in, for example, the grant office where I work now, all of the pre-award team, I work in the post-award, so I'm doing the grant management here. In the pre-award team, we're heavily focused on so life sciences, computer sciences, and most of the pre-award team helping with the applications, they all have scientific backgrounds. This was kind of a prerequisite that they thought would be very helpful for the researchers. In the other organizations I've worked at, this was not seen as something that was needed. I worked in pre-award at the university I was at previously, and so it's completely different strategies. And we could even have a whole discussion for an hour on what works here, and I think I have done that in the previous discussion. So I can stop that and say, my experience, the soft skills have been really important, but you can look out there and you can see jobs which are more focused on having a scientific background. If someone, as a researcher, wanted to go into that field, into research management, that is a field as well. So it really is accessible from both sides, from an administrative point of view and from a scientific point of view.
Perfect. Thank you. I suspect we'll have some questions coming your way later. So with that, I'll move on to my last panelist. Last but not at all least, we have previously recorded a conversation with Dr. Dorairaj Prabhakaran from PHFI. He's on travel today, and the timings wouldn't have worked. So may I now request the India Alliance team to play the recording, please. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Dr. Dorairaj Prabhakaran, to the IRMI Annual Conference. So since you are away, we thought we will get your thoughts online and share with our participants. So by way of introduction, you are a cardiologist and epidemiologist, and among many roles, currently is the Vice President, Research and Policy, and Director, Center for Control of Chronic Conditions at the Public Health Foundation of India, and Executive Director, Center for Chronic Disease Control. And you have vast experience in prevention of heart diseases and diabetes in India, and it cuts across fields of science, public health policy, and training. So welcome again.
Thank you, Dr. Nukala, for that very kind introduction. And thank you for having me in this panel discussion. My apologies for not being in person because I'm attending a meeting at in Bogota, Colombia, and it's late night here, or it would be late night here. So thank you once again for having me.
Great. So maybe I'll start off with the first question. You and your team at PHFI have received and continue to receive several national and international grants and fellowships. So could you perhaps share how they are managed at PHFI? How has it helped the researchers at PHFI, and what sort of support is available to the team that handles these grants and fellowships?
Right. So we have something equivalent of the research management division. We call it the grants administration here, essentially because it has all the types of grants that includes research grants, capacity building grants, and implementation grants, and therefore it's called grants administration. I am as the Vice President Research and Policy is the head of grants admin, who reports directly to the President. And there are various committees that help guide the strategy as well as the operational aspects of the grants admin. So we have a research advisory committee, which is headed usually by an internationally renowned scientist, a non-Indian, plus co-headed by another well-known Indian scientist. Professor Ban used to chair the research advisory committee, and given that he passed on a few years back, we are reorganizing the committee. And this committee provides strategic advice to the grants administration at PHFI, the overall research portfolios and what should be done, what should be the prioritized areas of research, and how do we set priorities and goals over the next 5 years or so. So we had our last meeting in 2019, where we set our 10-year goals, and we called it the 3x3 strategy. But annually also it takes stock of various activities that happen at PHFI and provides guidance. Then we have the Internal Research Management Committee, which is chaired by the Vice President Research. And it's basically a coordination looking at HR policies, financial management, the burn rate of the projects, and to allay any questions that the PIs may have or fears that they may have in terms of running the grants and so on. Like, for example, we need to provide them with a statement of expenditure every month so that they know how their grant is going. And so we put in some policies, particularly for large grants, which require quite a bit of nimbleness in terms of working on the grant. We also have a robust ethics committee. Currently it's headed by Professor Nikhil Tandon from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and it has a multidisciplinary group of members involving going beyond public health and medicine, as lawyers, as mandated by the ICMR as well as NIH and other funding agencies. We do have other important policies that are necessary for research, which includes the whistleblower policy to look at any misconduct in research or any fraudulent research. And therefore, we encourage our researchers to anonymously give us anything that might go wrong, so that, and we are very, very careful that we should not have any reputational hit because of such events. In terms of how the grants work, we have actually a grants manual and a finance manual, which is given to all the researchers when they join. They could go through it and actually identify the ways and means of submitting their grant. The grants admin, we have 4 or 5 staff. The major staff which reports to me is a grants manager, and we also have a grants controller from the finance side. We have a database administrator who keeps count of the papers, the publications, the regulatory issues, the passwords, and so on and so forth that are required to run this grants admin. We also have an ethics coordinator and an ethics member secretary who are all internal. So the grants admin team actually collates all the information every day in the morning in terms of whenever new RFAs come in, and puts it out across the board and sends it to people asking them to apply. If there are multiple applications and if only one single application is required, the Vice President Research constitutes a committee to evaluate the multiple application, and the best application goes in for the final application. In terms of the process itself, they have to submit a 1-page concept note before going ahead with the application, along with a budget, which is vetted for multiple things, including the indirects to the organization and so on. So this essentially is the process. And once the project comes in, yes, there is a post-award management, which involves the finance and the grants admin. And there is a large grants oversight committee, which also looks at big grants, because sometimes they're unwieldy and they require some kind of external assistance. And sometimes you also get external evaluators for very large grants. So this is, in a summary, is what the grants admin at PHFI does.
And the Vice President for Research and Policy is sort of the glue, bringing all these different elements together.
Yeah. The Vice President Research and Policy is the head of the whole research admin and reports to the President, who in turn reports to the board. The Vice President Research also makes a presentation about on the annual activities or research activities to the board.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that very comprehensive overview. And sort of from your experience, what advice would you share with your counterparts at other institutes who may be thinking about research management but are not entirely sure whether that's needed or not even? So could you share what would you say to them?
I think it's very important that we have a research management team. It may not be a very large team, even a single person would be adequate, but it is very important that we have that team, particularly in terms of providing advice. And one of the reasons why we should have is this actually entails, like, for example, at PHFI, we have SOPs for every activity. For ethics, we have an SOP. For financial management, we have an SOP. For grants management, we have an SOP. Who should be the signatory? What are the things that are required in terms of international agencies? NIH has got a particular requirement for the ethics committee. Also, the training of the research staff. So somebody who is well versed in that, who has knowledge of the management of research is required. You don't have to have a 4 to 5 member group, but you could have even one person who helps guide the process. And I think that's very important. If you're a very small organization, you can actually adhere to the research SOPs of a larger organization, have an MOU with them, and use their SOPs if they agree to it. But it's always better to standardize your research management process. Otherwise, you may fall foul of some regulation or the other, particularly given the fact it's very difficult in India, given the multiplicity of regulatory agencies, including adherence to the Foreign Currency Regulation Act or the FCRA, adherence to the Health Ministry's Steering Committee regulations, so on and so forth. So I think somebody should look at it separately. As researchers, we are a little chaotic and we might forget some of these things and work in a very non-standardized way. A standardized approach is needed.
So you mentioned this interesting model about signing perhaps a MOU with a larger organization if you don't have that in-house capacity, at least at the beginning. Are there actually examples where PHFI has been involved in such an arrangement?
Not necessarily PHFI. I actually head the other organization which you mentioned, the Center for Chronic Disease Control.
Right.
The Center for Chronic Disease Control has an MOU to give research oversight, ethics oversight to an organization called the Health-Related Information Dissemination amongst youth. And also it provided ethics oversight to the George Institute India sometime in the initial stages. So, and because we do multicentric trials involving multiple hospitals, so we do provide ethics oversight to some of those smaller organizations which do not have an ethics committee, also are unable to constitute the committee because of the way their operations are.
Great. Thank you very much. Hi, I think that brings us to a close of the panel discussion itself. So I'll open it up to questions from the participants. If you want, you can turn on your video and ask the question directed to one of the panelists, or you can type it in the chat. I do see one question, perhaps Dr. Nandini could answer this. Is there an annual conference of research ethics in India? Would it be a useful platform to learn and understand the proceedings of ethics policies and create awareness?
Yeah, actually there's a National Bioethics Conference run by the Bombay group, which actually runs the journal, the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics. That's the national conference. And the other one is by the Forum for Ethics Review Committees in India, which has very interesting topics covers interesting topics, not only for the ethics committee members, but also the researchers, faculty, etc. every year.
If there are no other questions, there was a follow-up question here which says, do you believe that peer pressure to publish research findings a reason for unethical practices, irrespective of researchers having awareness about ethical practices? Is it a false incentive, publish or perish?
Yes, that's a very big question actually, Whatever you do, this will be there in the background. You need to have good monitoring system to detect that and penalize. Then the number may come down, but I don't think it can be wiped out.
I know that India Alliance, I don't know if anyone from the office is on this call, but I know India Alliance has put together some policies, at least for the host institutions that have their fellows. And I know DBT also has some policies on research integrity on their website, as well as ICMR, of course. So, and the last question here is, how early should we create awareness about research ethics? Is it high school? Is it undergrad, PhD, postdoc? What's a good starting point?
Actually, short courses to start with. If anybody is interested, they can actually go in for diploma and then masters, even do PhD. But there are some people who are going straight for PhD.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Shailja, did you want to come in? I thought you wanted to say something there.
I thought PhD would be a good, just to be very direct, PhD would be a good starting point. A course in ethics while a person is just about commencing his research is a good point to start ethics course.
Any questions for Stephanie? She is a research manager. She'll give you first-hand experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly. All right, going once, twice, last call.
Well, I have only one question for Stephanie. Sorry, this is Ajay from NCCS Pune. Stephanie, since you are a research manager, and we we have a different culture of doing research in India. So would it be useful for cross exchange of research personnels working in the field of research ethics to understand more about how you deal with situations, what kind of preventive measures the organizations abroad take in reducing the unethical practices? Can you throw some light if we have time?
Yes, good question, because ethics and due diligence is something that's extremely important in many of the EU, so the European funding schemes and funding agencies. We have had to put in place in all of the European institutions data protection officers. We have ethics officers in place. We have specific policies. So at the institute that I work at now, we actually have the ethics officer who we've set up processes and workflows to really go through every application. And once the application is funded, then to go through it again to make sure that we hit all of the ethics points. The EU, so the European Union funding schemes are very heavily focused on that they have a mandatory ethics self-assessment, and once it's awarded, some of the projects which may encounter ethical issues will then be given a more detailed ethical report, which can be very laborious to meet all of the requirements, shall we say. And so it's really necessary to have the help at the institute. This is something that I'm not an expert in. And so it's been very important, because there was a time where the researchers were coming to us, because at that time we did not have the person in place. It was still something that was new, that the European Union started bringing more to the forefront these ethics requirements, and the researchers are coming to us, and this is not my area of expertise. I'm not an expert in ethics, and there was no one for me to pass the researcher on to. And now this is the case, and now we're seeing a lot of institutions that there was more kind of a clear structure in place. So in terms of doing exchange, if I understood the question correctly, to do exchange with European institutions, many of them have got these structures in place now to have specific ethics officers and have data protection officers, and it would be potentially useful, because our funding schemes are so focused on having these ethics requirements met that we have to have the structures in place. It may be a learning experience, if I understood the question correctly, to visit these institutions and exchange with them. Yes.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm afraid we are out of time. So I just want to thank you all, the panelists and the participants, for your time and participation. Very much appreciate it. And until next time, goodbye and take care.